The fate of the 9th Spanish Legion of the Imperial Roman Army is a mystery that fascinates historians. The Legion was originally created in the 1st century BCE after the Marian military reforms of the Roman Republic's army. It would be deployed and redeployed throughout the Republic's imperial reach before being posted as a key legion in the Roman invasion of Britain under the Emperor Claudius from the year 43. The 9th Legion appears to have remained in Britain for the remainder of the 1st century, witnessing the failed uprising of the Iceni people under their Queen Boudica. It would continue to campaign in Britain as the Romans attempted to push further northwards on the island, but after being present while the Romans campaigned in the lands of the modern country of Scotland, the 9th Legion seems to disappear from history. In this episode, we tell the story of the 9th Legion and investigate this mysterious disappearance to see if we can work out what's happened. The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler. Volume 3, The Classical World. Episode 45A, The Roman 9th Legion. Firstly, let's set the scene. It is the end of the 2nd century BCE in the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic existed before the Roman Empire, but the Republic had become an empire in its own right due to the fact that it now ruled over many different peoples in many different lands. Successes over the Carthaginians and the Greeks had enabled the Republic to now control an area beyond the Italian peninsula, which included large amounts of territory on the Iberian Peninsula and the Balkan Peninsula, as well as significant landholdings in western Anatolia, and a region of North Africa centred on the conquered city of Carthage, modern Tunis. With the expansion of the state, more peasants were heading for the wealth of the cities, and this meant that less agricultural yield was being produced, and of course those who were not members of the higher classes were the ones to suffer as a consequence. So there became a very definite divide between the upper class, known as the patricians, and the rest of the citizens, known as the plebeians. With the plebeians becoming less wealthy, this created a problem for army recruitment, as soldiers were initially expected to fund themselves, so there were less people being put forward to become members of the Roman army. The patrician class had to concede that they would have to submit the wealth required to pay for a professional army to defend the interests of the Roman Republic as a whole, and a system of army reforms was instigated by a man called Gaius Marius. Gaius Marius was a plebeian, but he also had a successful military career and scaled the political ladder to become a tribune to the plebeians. The plebeian class had always had representation in Roman politics, since revolts and reforms within the Roman Republic long before this period. Due to the tensions between the classes, two distinct political movements emerged. The Optimates were a conservative group that looked to uphold the values that the patricians had established and generally supported the ruling Roman Senate. The Populares opposed the Optimates and pushed for reform in order to spread the wealth to the lower classes, such as the plebeians. Marius would naturally become a part of the Popularis movement. We focused on this period of Roman history during our episode about the late Republic. Legions had existed as portions of the Roman army as a whole, right back from when the Republic elected 2 consuls to lead the army, with each consul having its own legion. As the lands of the Republic grew, so did the army size, and the amount of legions required would need to increase accordingly. Each legion may have contained between 4,500 and 5,000 men around the time of the Marian reforms. Marius would dictate that the legions would contain a number of cohorts, a subdivision of several hundred men, which were further subdivided into centuries of several dozen men. At the beginning of the 1st century BCE, yet another social tension rose, but this time it involved individuals outside of Rome itself. In becoming the Roman Republic, Rome had expanded its influence from the city of Rome to subjugate all of the different ethnic groups of the Italian peninsula, and members of these ethnic groups were not given the same civil rights as Roman citizens. A rebellion rose up from within these Italian ethnic groups, and the outcome was the Social War, which broke out in the year 91 BCE. During this period, the city of Asculum was besieged by the Roman army. Asculum is known today as Ascoli Piceno and is on the opposite side of the Italian peninsula to the city of Rome. The significance of this siege is that this is the first mention of a Roman 9th Legion, but this does not mean that it is the same legion that is the subject of this episode. The Romans won the Social War, but had to make some significant national reforms to prevent the fragmentation of the Roman Republic going forward. Social tensions continued to bubble underneath the surface of this mighty republic as the century moved on. These social tensions often played out on a political stage, and the Roman Senate was starting to lose control and authority as a consequence, as individuals started throwing their weight around and rallying support for their respective causes. A triumvirate was formed to try to provide stability, and it was comprised of 3 powerful Roman statesmen called Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. During this period, Julius Caesar led Roman armies into Gaul with the intention of subjugation and conquest, and a 9th Roman legion is also mentioned as being part of this operation under Julius Caesar. This was among other Roman legions, I should hasten to add. The legion remained under Julius Caesar's command after the splitting of the first triumvirate, when Caesar and Pompey became fierce opponents of each other. This episode is referred to as Caesar's Civil War, and it appears that the 9th Legion was disbanded somewhere near the conclusion of this conflict.
Octavian's 9th Legion.
In the aftermath of Caesar's death, those responsible for instigating his assassination fled east, and it would be Caesar's nephew, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, and Mark Antony that would pursue them. The climax of this conflict, called the Liberators' Civil War, was in Macedonian lands at the Battle of Philippi in the year 42 BCE. It is suggested that the 9th Legion may have been among those legions fighting on behalf of Octavian's second triumvirate at Philippi, and that they were granted the name the 9th Macedonian Legion in honour of their successes in the war. It is not very clear how closely linked this 9th Legion was to the one disbanded under Caesar, but it has been suggested that this new 9th Legion was based on veterans of the disbanded legion. The historian and author Dr. Simon Elliott has written a book about the Ninth Legion, and in his book he tracks the movements of the Ninth Legion after the Liberator's Civil War. The Roman conquest of Western Europe was a gradual affair. After the Romans had defeated the Carthaginians during the protracted wars over the course of the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, the Romans had gained a foothold in the Iberian Peninsula, gaining the coastal lands previously under the control of the Carthaginians. During the 2nd century BCE, the Romans had successfully taken large swathes of Iberian lands in the south and the west of the peninsula, so that they were in control of most of it. As we are aware, Julius Caesar successfully conquered Gaul for the Romans, which is equivalent to the lands of the modern country of France. Those resistant Celtic societies of the north coast of Spain were now looking at Roman-occupied lands across the Cantabrian Sea, which is in the Bay of Biscay, so they were surrounded by Romans. The Emperor Augustus, previously Octavian, ordered the total conquest of Hispania by attacking the Celtic tribes in the north. These Celtic tribes had no interest in being conquered, and they offered stout resistance to the Romans. This area is notorious in history for being hard to overpower, as the mountainous terrain makes it easier to defend than open territory. As a conquest, Augustus would allocate 8 Roman legions to the task, and the 9th Macedonian Legion was included. The 9th Legion is described as having fought with distinction during this successful Roman campaign, where the final part of Hispania was conquered and brought into the Roman Empire. The legion would be renamed in honour of this achievement as Legio Hispana, which we anglicised as the 9th Spanish Legion. After the conclusion of the Cantabrian Wars, some Roman legions had to remain in Hispania to deal with any rebellions, but the 9th Spanish Legion was not one of them. Most historians agree that the legion was redeployed to the city of Aquileia, which is 50 miles eastwards from Venice, although it's possible that it did take some part in operations in Germania after the Cantabrian Wars. Generally, from Aquileia, the 9th Spanish Legion would oversee operations in Pannonia, where tensions were high between the Romans and the native tribes. After the lifetime and reign of Augustus, the 9th Spanish Legion was sent to North Africa to bolster the Roman forces against those of the rebellious Numidian deserter called Tacfarinas. The legion would play an important role in the defeat of Tacfarinas and further brought the region under Roman domination, which was an important source of grain for the Romans. It is suggested that this campaign was important in the timeline of Mauritania's complete absorption into the Roman Empire under Emperor Claudius. Emperor Claudius had other imperial ambitions which involved Britain and the 9th Spanish Legion.
Invasion of Britain.
Emperor Claudius's invasion of Britain started in the year 43. And he commissioned a military general called Aulus Plautius to start the invasion. The 9th Spanish Legion was called across from Pannonia to join 3 other legions for the initial crossing. The 9th Spanish Legion is also described as having a large number of auxiliaries attached to it, which would double its numbers. Auxiliaries would often be military units that would work alongside the legion, and they would often belong to ethnic groups that had been subjugated by the Roman Empire and would be encouraged to operate using their own specialities, whether they be cavalrymen or archers or just simple skirmishers. Their reward may be to be allowed full Roman citizenship and all the benefits that came with it, but this reward would only be provided after a great number of years of service. Their support of the main legion was vital. Skirting across the various accounts from various sources, we can suggest that the Roman legions arrived in Britain on the east coast of the modern country of Kent. Advancing westwards, the Roman legions would need to cross the river Medway in order to reach the area of the modern city of London. It may have been while trying to cross the river that the legion first encountered the king of the Catuvellauni tribe, Togodumnus, and his brother Caratacus. The two brothers would defy the Romans and fight hard to prevent the Romans from taking their territory. The might of the Romans was just too much for the local tribes, and despite their bravery and strength, the Romans would get the upper hand. Caratacus had to flee to the west, and this opened the pathway for the Romans to approach the very important settlement that is the modern English city of Colchester. After successfully taking Colchester and naming it Camulodunum, the Romans subjugated the local Iceni tribe, and the Iceni kingdom under their king Prasutagus agreed to exist as a vassal kingdom under the Romans. The 9th Spanish Legion are believed to have remained in Britain but not in Camulodunum. They are stated to have remained to the west of the Iceni territories of East Anglia and helped to establish vexillation fortresses in the East Midlands area of Britain. Vexillation fortresses are a particular type of Roman fortress that would be suitable to garrison a large number of Roman soldiers, so it is likely that the 9th Spanish Legion was stationed across these vexillation fortresses. We then do not hear much about the 9th Spanish Legion during the 50s. The Romans were campaigning quite a lot in the west during this period, often putting down revolts, and there's no mention of direct involvement of the 9th Legion. It may be the fact that they were controlling affairs in their area of the island without there being any major dramas. Something that did affect the 9th Legion was the aftermath of the death of King Prasutagus of the Iceni kingdom. Prasutagus apparently remained loyal to the Romans, but the Romans may have taken advantage of his death by claiming that Prasutagus had to some extent promised his Iceni kingdom to the Romans on his death, and he may well have done this, but it could have been under duress. Nevertheless, the Romans moved in to completely annex the Iceni kingdom into the Roman Empire. King Prasutagus' queen, called Boudica, was not prepared to accept this, and therefore started the Boudican Revolt. The Boudican Revolt involved the Iceni tribes, but also some local allies such as the Trinovantes, so it would gain interest from other tribes who had maybe thought twice about rebelling against Roman rule previously. Boudica would firstly successfully target Camulodunum before turning her attention to Londinium, the Roman settlement at London. The revolt was very significant and dangerous, and it prompted a concerted response from the Romans. The 9th Spanish Legion was called to action to help the Romans defend Camulodunum and Londinium, but only a portion of the entire legion would be able to desert the vexillations and head south. Either while travelling or while attempting to defend Camulodunum, it appears that the representation of the 9th Legion was apprehended and dealt a crushing defeat, leaving the remnants to retreat back northwards to their vexillations, and leaving Londinium and subsequently Verulamium, modern St Albans, to fall to Boudica. The Romans had to regroup after substantial losses, but the losses were felt by both sides, so the casualties of the rebellion to both sides may have had a profound effect on the ultimate outcome. The Romans finally dealt with the revolt at the Battle of Watling Street, where the Boudican revolt was put down once and for all, and Boudica ultimately took her own life. The Boudican revolt was not a great moment for the 9th Legion, and not a great moment for its young commander at the time, Quintus Petilius Cerealis. Cerealis would depart for the continent after this dreadful episode, but would return to take command of the 9th Spanish Legion once again in the year 71, when he was appointed as the governor of Britannia. Cerealis would bring the 2nd Adiutrix Legion across the Channel to Britannia and would relieve the 9th Spanish Legion from its main fortress at Colonia Lindum, the modern city of Lincoln. With the 2nd Adiutrix replacing the 9th Spanish Legion, the 9th would now be free to take on a new task in the far north of the province and the modern English lands of Yorkshire. Cerealis would personally lead the 9th Spanish Legion north to Eboracum, the modern city of York. There they would be joined by the 20th Victorious Valeria Legion, with the intention to defeat the Brigantes. The Brigantes were a coalition of indigenous Celtic tribes who dominated the lands of the north, which was a buffer between the Roman province in the south and the far north of the island, which we recognise today as the country of Scotland. The Roman campaign against the Brigantes was quite successful, and control of the area had been gained during the 70s. Cerealis would leave his post as the governor of Britannia when he was elected as a Roman consul in the year 74. The movements of the 9th Spanish Legion after this point are not documented well at all. Archaeological evidence is often referred to when establishing the movement of Roman legions because inscriptions were often made in tiles and markers with the name of the legion. So we do see inscriptions in the area of the modern town of Carlisle from the 70s, which strongly suggests that the 9th Spanish Legion would have been stationed there at some point during these exchanges with the Brigantes. This was also the period of the celebrated Roman historian called Tacitus. Tacitus wrote of the 9th Spanish Legion and its activities during the 80s. A new and significant governor was appointed in Britannia during this period, and his name was Agricola. One of Agricola's ambitions was to push northwards into the lands that we recognise today as Scottish territory, and we know from the writings of Tacitus that the 9th Spanish Legion were among those present during this campaign. The 9th was proceeding northwards when their camp was attacked by natives. We don't really know what overall impact this had on the Legion as a whole, but it may not have done a lot for its reputation. It was possibly in the year 83 that Agricola scored a decisive victory against the Caledonian tribes of the far north of Great Britain at the Battle of Mons Graupius. It appears that auxiliary fighters did all the work in this battle, so that the legions such as the 9th Spanish were not required, even though they were certainly present. I have to question the amount of impact that the attack on the 9th Spanish Legion's camp had on the Legion as a whole, as this is because we lose track of the Legion's activities after Agricola's governorship. Archaeologically, there is evidence of inscribed stone referencing the 9th Legion at Eboracum, modern York, and this actually dates to the year 108, so this is a quarter of a century after Agricola's campaign. There is also evidence of the 9th Legion being present at Nijmegen sometime around or after this period. Nijmegen is actually a city in the modern country of the Netherlands, so this is nothing to do with Britannia. The Roman Emperor Hadrian came to Britannia in the year 122, and he brought with him the victorious 6th Legion to occupy Eboracum, which we associate closely with the 9th Spanish Legion. It seems that when the victorious 6th Legion arrived, there was little or no sign of a handover or an alliance of the two legions. So what were the 9th Legion actually doing in 122? A very important indicator could be the construction of Hadrian's Wall. With the amount of work undertaken, you would imagine that if the 9th Spanish Legion were present, that there would be inscriptions in the masonry of the construction. There are no inscriptions to do with the 9th Spanish Legion at Hadrian's Wall. So this also suggests little or no presence of the 9th Legion. If we move forward to the reign of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the construction of the Colonnetta Maffei in the year 168 lists the serving Roman military legions. The Colonnetta Maffei was a pillar that stood in Rome, and its list of the legions famously does not state the name of the 9th Spanish Legion. So the questions are, what actually happened to the 9th Spanish Legion? And why is it even important?
Conclusions.
The period of the 9th Spanish Legion coincided with the period in Roman history called Pax Romana. This is considered to be a time when the Romans were at their most stable and powerful. Within the Roman borders, threats were at a minimum. So the suggestion that the Romans lost an entire military legion during this period is almost unthinkable. If it could be demonstrated that somebody was responsible for the total destruction of an entire Roman legion, then that would be quite a boast. Certainly throughout the campaigns of the 9th Spanish Legion in Britain, the responsibilities gradually moved further and further northwards until the legion was in the depths of the modern country of Scotland, with its rugged landscapes so hard to overcome as these mountainous terrains can often prove to be. Many patriotic Scottish people may wish to prove that it was the native Scottish tribes who destroyed the 9th Spanish Legion. The British author Rosemary Sutcliffe, born in 1920, wrote a book called The Eagle of the Ninth, which told the story of a Roman man who went to discover the truth of the disappearance of his father's 9th Spanish Legion, only to discover that the legion was destroyed by the natives in the lands of Scotland. This kind of storytelling only served to excite the notion of native Scottish tribes such as the Picts being responsible for the unlikely destruction of an entire Roman legion. To be fair, it's certainly not beyond the realms of all possibility that a unit of the 9th Spanish Legion with no auxiliaries might be overrun by hostile natives while camped and caught by surprise. But many historians cannot accept that an entire Roman legion with all of its training, resources and experience be wiped out by native tribes. Add to this that there was no evidence of a mass slaughter of Romans in the archaeological record, and this counter-evidence is quite considerable. As a theory, it is possible, but as of yet, completely unprovable. There are certainly two other factors to consider when making this counter-argument. Had the Picts, or Confederation of Celtic Tribes, destroyed the 9th Spanish Legion, the Romans would have likely been reluctant to talk about it to any great extent. They would certainly not want it to be common knowledge that this had happened. They certainly wouldn't want there to be any notion of any Roman legion being vulnerable or fallible. They certainly wouldn't want any memories of disastrous days such as the Battle of Teutoburg Forest in the year 9 CE, where a Germanic coalition wiped out the 17th, 18th and 19th legions. We are fully aware of a battle taking place on that fateful occasion, but there is no evidence of a pitched battle involving the 9th Spanish Legion. So what are the other theories that challenge this potential fantasy of a famous Celtic victory over the Romans? The strong evidence that a contingent of the 9th Legion was redeployed to Nijmegen on the continent is unignorable, and it is not unusual to see redeployments over long distances. Certainly the Ninth Spanish Legion itself spent a lot of time in different areas of the Roman Empire, as we have discovered over the course of this episode. And the redeployment of the victorious 6th Legion to Eboracum to replace the 9th Spanish Legion was not an unusual type of redeployment in terms of Roman military organisation and reorganisation. The thing with this is that even if it was redeployed in Nijmegen, it still doesn't explain its disappearance. It still disappeared without explanation, whether in the lands of Britannia or the lowlands of the northwest continent. Some historians suggest that the Legion could have been redeployed again in other areas of the empire. From the year 132, a large contingent of Jewish people in the lands of Judah were encouraged to revolt against their Roman rulers by an individual called Simon bar Kokhba. It was a significant rebellion, and multiple Roman legions were sent to the Levant to deal with the problem, and it's certainly not out of the question that the 9th Spanish Legion, with all of their acclaim, would be sent there as well. However, those historians would have to assume that the legion would be a complete legion, and there's no firm evidence of a fully sized 9th Legion since at least 50 years previous. It is certainly not unusual for only a number of cohorts of the entire legion to be utilised, and many historians believe that the deployment of legionaries at Nijmegen was only a fraction of the 9th Legion. Due to a complete lack of evidence, historians cannot agree whether the 9th Legion was destroyed at the Bar Kokhba revolt, disbanded at the Bar Kokhba revolt, or whether only part of the legion was there, or whether it was ever there at all. It's a theory based without any concrete evidence. Interestingly, there is a small loose end in the writings of the later Roman historian Cassius Dio, who was alive at the turn of the 3rd century. He stated that an unnamed Roman legion was destroyed during the Roman-Parthian War of the 160s. The Romans and the Parthians were at war with each other throughout the period of Parthian dominance of the Persian Empire, but this particular episode of their exchanges concluded before the construction and erection of the Colonnetta Maffei in 168. So if the 9th Spanish Legion were this unnamed destroyed legion that Cassius Dio spoke of, then it would make sense for its name to not be present on the Colonnetta Maffei. The issue with this is that we would surely know more about the activities of the 9th Spanish Legion in contemporary written history. It just doesn't seem convincing to me that there were no written records of the Legion for 80 years, and then it appears as an unnamed legion in the Parthian Empire. There is no concrete evidence for the 9th Spanish Legion being this unnamed legion, but equally there is nothing to prove that it definitely wasn't. A final theory is one that I feel is the most convincing when presented with all the facts, considering the nature of things as we read and learn about them. It may have simply been that the legion was slowly disbanded, dissolved or redistributed. If the 9th Spanish Legion was caught unawares by Caledonian natives during Agricola's campaigns in the 80s, then this could have had a lasting effect on the confidence in leadership and organisation of the Legion that needed to be seriously addressed. It would make sense for the remaining cohorts of the 9th Legion to then be reorganised and redistributed to other legions whose momentum was more favourable at the time. With each passing year in the Roman Empire, problems and priorities came and went, and decisions needed to be made. And the best military leaders would not have allowed sentiment to get in the way of the right decision. So I would challenge those historians that believe that the 9th Spanish Legion would have remained intact due to the fact that its name and reputation preceded it. Certainly the Caledonian tribes wouldn't have cared less what the name of the legion was attacking them. It would certainly make sense when considering the lack of evidence that there was no dramatic event that ended the existence of the 9th Spanish Legion. This theory is highly anticlimactic and does not suit our desire for an enticing story. It is also not provable. So, what do you think? Based on what we have learned today, what do you think was the likeliest fate of the 9th Spanish Legion? The reason that this is such an interesting and important subject is because we can all access the evidence and we can all have an opinion.
Adobe Firefly is the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video editing for today's creative process. Built for creators of every kind, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, the budgets aren't getting bigger, and the timelines, oh yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Unlock a better way to make with Adobe Firefly.
A very, very big, warm thank you to all of you for listening to this week's episode of the History of the World podcast, a special episode created for the History of the World podcast Illuminati member, Jeffrey Molloy. Jeffrey has made a substantial amount of contributions to the podcast and has earned the right to commission this special episode. And what a great subject choice. Really enjoyed researching this one and bringing you this mystery. Who doesn't like a good history mystery? So thank you, Jeffrey. Now, for all of you, if you do enjoy the podcast and you would like to support this podcast, then please do visit the website, History of the World podcast at beg your pardon, I was about to give you the email address then. It's historyoftheworldpodcast.com. And then click on the Patreon link and you can sign up to make a monthly contribution for as little or as much as you like. You will become a lifelong member of the History of the World podcast Illuminati. You'll qualify for gifts and rewards, including the ability to commission your own special episode once you have accumulated the correct amount, once you've hit that goal. If you'd like to get in touch with the podcast, drop me a line at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. And you can also follow the podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Threads and Mastodon. If you can't get enough of the podcast, then look out for the special debrief episode where I'll be talking some more about this episode that you just listened to, and there'll be a few other little bits and pieces as usual. But look out for that one. I think it will be tomorrow, that one. I think we'll have to delay that one by a day. So look out for that one tomorrow. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. The next episode we're going to be doing is another special episode about Roman Greece. So what happened after the Hellenistic period when the Romans took Greece? We talk so much about Byzantium, Constantinople. What was going on in Athens and Sparta during that period of the Romans and then subsequently the Byzantines who were ruling over the Balkan Peninsula? What exactly was happening? We're going to find out in our next big episode. But until then, thanks so much for listening and be good.
The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler. Please consider making a financial contribution by going to the historyoftheworldpodcast.com website and clicking on the Patreon link. Email the show at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. And don't forget to join our social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Tumblr. See you next time.